Okay, here we are Tuesday night, and the topic is that you are about to be knocked off your chair by the Levush and the Maharit Alagazi. If you at some point actually feel like you are falling off your chair, please let us know immediately. We would like to get it on camera. Tonight's topic is, it's a halachic topic, it's a Kabbalistic topic, a Chassidic topic, and really a fundamental topic as far as religion is concerned, life is concerned. It's the topic of action versus intention, even outside of religion, right? I thought of bringing you a gift, and it's the thought that counts, right? Machshava versus Maisa. And we're going to see some remarkable information. This relates to Parshas Matos at least 3 ways. So, Mitzvah Shem, you'll be loaded coming Shabbos. And, and we'll see some interesting characters, some great people along the way. Let's begin. Number 1, it's a Gemara in Kiddushin at the end. It's also in Nazir. The Tanya we learned in a Braisa. It says in this week's Parsha, a woman makes a vow. The husband has the rights to be mefer, to annul the vow on the day that he hears of it. And there's a pasuk that says, Isha hafeiram, her husband has annulled them, v'Hashem yislach la, but God will forgive her. In other words, a wife took a neder, she prohibited something upon herself. Unbeknownst to her, her husband annulled it. She thinks the neder is still extant. And she violates, and she can't hold herself back, she violates the neder, presuming, thinking she's doing something wrong, but in reality, the neder was off, the husband annulled it. Nonetheless, the pasuk says, "V'Hashem yislach la," the Eibishter will forgive her. She needs tshuva, she needs atonement. So, frek the braisa b'amea kosev medaber. What's the case? Be'isha shenodra benazir. A woman took a vow, for example, a nazir. V'shama ba'ila, her husband heard. V'harfela, he's like, no, this ain't gonna work. You know? No. He annuls the vow. The Brisa? Go check. V'shama ba'ila, her husband heard. V'harfela, and he annulled it. V'hi lo yada, but she was unaware. Shahafrela ba'da, her husband annulled it. V'haisa shoysa yayin, she was drinking wine, umetama l'meisim, and being and purifying herself to the dead, assuming that it was prohibited. But in reality, there was actually no more neder. And nevertheless, V'Hashem yislach la, she requires forgiveness. There's an Aveira here. Yes, a woman could be a nazir. It says so in the Chumash clearly. There were a group of people that came to 770 years ago, and they wanted to test the Rebbe in his knowledge. And Reb Shmuel Levinton sensed that, and he went over to this group of fellows and said, "You guys are scholars. Can I ask you a simple question? Maybe you could help me." So they said, "Okay." So he says, "Can a woman become a nazir?" So they started pulling back and forth. He said, "It's a clear pasuk in Chumash that a woman could become a nazir. Are you sure you want to go to the Rebbe's room and question him?" And anyhow, okay. So Rabbi Akiva, fine, this is the Braisa, finished, this is a Braisa. So the neder is annulled by the husband. Now the woman thinks the neder is still on. Like, what if the woman would have forgotten her own neder? What if she would have forgotten it? Let's say she became a nazir, later that day she's drinking wine, she's in the cemetery because she forgot. And in truth, her husband had annulled. So she has 2 checks going her way. A, her husband annulled the neder, and B, she was mistaken on her, she completely forgot. L'cher, she would not need any kapara over there, because she didn't have in mind to do anything wrong. She forgot. Usually, shoygig is, you didn't have in mind to do something wrong, but the damage was done. But here there is no damage done because the husband annulled the neder. It's like the famous Nesivas Hamishpat. who says that if you sell somebody some forbidden food, okay, a sale was done, and the buyer was unaware, but after she consumed it, they find out that the food was forbidden, so mekach tos, they want their money back. So the halacha is, Rambam Shulchan Aruch, that it depends. If it was only prohibited rabbinically, the sale is still binding. If it was biblically prohibited, the sale is void. If it's only rabbinic, that the Chum said you can't eat it, the sale is still binding. So the Nesivos HaMishpat says it's like this. If it's biblically a problem, so then the one that bought it, yeah, when he ate it, he thought it was okay. But a crime was done. He corrupted himself by eating treif. Because when the Torah prohibits something, the item itself becomes prohibited. So whether you were aware or not, damage was done. By a Rabbanon, however, says the Nesivos, the Chacham do not have the power to tamper with the existence of things in the world. They can't make something, they can't change the status of the item to become tomei or prohibited. They can tell the Jew, the Gavra, we restrain you from enjoying that, from partaking from that. So says the Nesivos that by the Rabbanon the issue is only on the person, and therefore if you did it unwittingly, there's nothing wrong because you were unaware. So from your end, there's no issue, and there's no damage done because the rabbis don't have the power to affect a transformation in the item itself. So l'chera, you would say the same thing over here. If the husband annulled the neder, so there's no neder. The issue is only the woman thinks it's wrong, so how could she go and violate? But if she forgot about her neder, I would say the same thing. There's no harm done as far as the neder is actually off in actuality. As far herself, she wasn't aware. It's only an issue if she recalls her vow, she thinks the vow is binding, and she nonetheless succumbs to violate it. And the chiddush is, although the husband annulled the vow, but she thought she was doing something wrong, she needs atonement. Fine. Okay, we've set that straight. Says the Gemara Rabbi Akiva, Ki hava moti lahai psuk. When Rabbi Akiva would reach this pasuk, hava bachi, he would cry. Omar, he would say the following: Uma mi, if somebody sheniskaven lechol basar chazir, if one wanted to eat, someone was looking to have some good chazir, right? Someone was, the Gemara says that everything the Eibishter prohibited, shali lon kavasa, he gave us something which is permitted, which reflects that. Now, as there was a Jew who was a good friend with a guy, and the Jew was in the guy's house, they're sitting schmoozing at the table, and the guy says, is it true that if your life's at stake, you'll eat treif? The Jew says, yeah. So the guy says, you see the pork on the table? The Jew says, yeah. The guy takes out a gun. Eat it! So the Jew's like, all right. Takes out his fork and cuts a piece. He's about to consume it, and the guy says, I was just testing to see what your reaction would be. And the Yid's like, but you couldn't wait another minute. Anyhow, but the Gemara says, whatever the Eibishter prohibited, there's something else. You want to be Mamala Taiva, there's something just as good, or almost as good. It mirrors it, which is permitted, and that's it. So, but imagine you have a guy or a woman, somebody who really wants to eat the chazer, okay? And they're trying their best to get the chazer, and they think they're eating it, and afterwards they find out that actually what they ate was kosher. So you would think, no harm done. Va'ala b'yadeh basal, he wanted to eat chazer, pig, and it turned out it was lamb. So Rabbi Akiva says this is the case of the woman in the vow. She thought she was doing something wrong. Amra Torah, the Torah says she needs kapara v'slicha, she needs atonement. So says Rabbi Akiva, imagine mish niskaven lechol basar chazer, va'ala b'yadeh basar chazer. Imagine if you wanted to do the crime, and you did it. Al achas kam v'kama, who are we in hot water? If just intention requires atonement, imagine if you did the crime too. And we'll start with the Shaila. Why was Rabbi Akiva the Tana that made this remark? More than that, it says when he reached this pasuk, he would cry tears. This pasuk really struck a chord with Rabbi Akiva. Why? Okay. But before we get there, we need to do a bit of an exploration. We're going to go on a bit of a journey. Ultimately, we're going to come to one of the most difficult comments of the Ur HaChaim, which everyone deals with. and we'll try and save him from a whopping kasha. But before then, we need to go on a bit of a journey. And the journey is, how does the Torah actually view negative intentions? What we saw over here is, this week's parsha, you need atonement. However, if you look in number 2, it's a Gemara in Kiddushin, the end of the first parak. If someone has a good thought, that means a good thought to do a mitzvah, but circumstances don't allow you to do it, the Eibishter considers it like you did the mitzvah. Machshava toiva kodesh baruch hu mitzaref l'maaseh. God considers as if you fulfilled the mitzvah. However, machshava ra, this is where we start, an evil thought, ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maaseh. The Eibishter does not attach it to action. A negative thought, meaning, it's the flip side. If one had intention to do an Aveira, you're planning to rob a bank, you had intention to do the crime, but due to circumstances, it never ended up happening. So the Eibishter considers it like nothing. It's not mitzaref l'maaseh. What? Oh, you're hired. You're hired. Right. Like no bigger contradiction. Now, Shenemar, as it says, Im Avin Ro'isi Belibi Lo Yishma Hashem, it says in Tehillim that if I see a sin in my heart, but God does not see it. Now, that pasuk could have meant if someone just has negative desires, and but they don't entertain it. Maybe David's saying that even if I have the bad Yetzer Hara and log negative temptations, but if I don't entertain them, as far as God's concerned, they don't exist. You could have interpreted the pasuk that way. The Gemara is saying no. It's talking about even if someone entertains and harbors these thoughts, not only they have the desire in their heart, but they entertain the thoughts and they plan on following through. But it doesn't reach the world of actuality. In the end, it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. Hashem does not attach it to action. Now, there is a debate between Rashi and the Meiri. The simple reading of the Gemara with Rashi is, the Eibishter considers it like it's nothing. A fleeting thought, it's nothing. The Meiri says no, the Eibishter will still pin you for the thought. It's just not considered like you did it. It's far from doing it. By a mitzvah, the positive thought is like you actually did it. If you wanted to do a mitzvah, but circumstances don't allow, it's like you did it. By an Aveira, not so. If you wanted to rob the bank and circumstances didn't allow, you didn't rob the bank. But the Meiri says, the Eibishter will still hold you accountable some level for the thought. Rashi is mashmer, it's nothing. It's just a fleeting, like the fleeting wind. But either way, the Gemara continues, but ve'elomo'ani mekayim, what will I do with the pasuk? It says in Yirmiyahu, hineni mevias elo'am hazeh ra, I will bring upon this nation evil, pri machshavosam, the fruit of their thought. It sounds like the Eibush will punish us for our thought. Well, according to the Meiri, what's the question? He just said the Eibush does hold cheshbon for our thoughts, just not as much as action. But there's still some repercussion for negative thought. This would seem like Rashi, that the Gemara first meant that thoughts are nothing. And therefore the question is, Yirmiyah seems to refute that. Yirmiyah says the Jews will suffer for the thoughts. So that seems to indicate in the direction of Rashi. But what's the Gemara's answer? The Gemara says, what does pre-machshavosim mean, the fruit of their thoughts? Why does it say fruit? If it means Hashem will deliver retribution for our thoughts, what's fruit have to do with it? It means like this: if you act upon your thought, God hits you twice, you get struck twice for the action and for the thought. If you don't bring it into action, it remains nothing. Machshav v'sha'isa pri, if the thought leads to action, then you get struck for both. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maaseh. He attaches the thought to the action, you get pinned for both. However, machshava she'ein ba pri, but if the thought has no fruits, it remains in thought. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maaseh, doesn't get counted. Fine, that's the Gemara. So the obvious question is, this second Gemara in Kiddushin, which is earlier in the Masechta, the end of the first parak, at least according to Rashi, is telling me an evil machshav is nothing. But in what we opened with, which is in the end of Gemara Kiddushin and Nazir, from this week's parsha, Rabbi Kiva says clearly you need slicha v'chapara for intending to do a prohibition. So how do you answer that? So according to the Meiri I mentioned to you, no sweat, the Meiri says a negative machshava is not like an action. But it's epis, it's something. And that's what number 1 is talking about, that the woman, by the nazir, she thought she was doing something wrong, she needs kapara. So according to the Meiri, you have a simple answer. The Gemara in number 2 was saying an evil machshav is just not the same as action, but it's something. It's something. That's number 1. Fine. Interestingly, though, the Meiri in number 4, the Meiri I quoted to you before is in his commentary on Kiddushin. However, the Meiri wrote a work on tshuva, Chibur HaTshuva, a composition of tshuva, and in number 4 he gives a different answer to the question. A different answer than l'chor, what would come out from his own words that I mentioned to you. And what does he say in number 4? A very simple answer. There's a huge difference between the 2 Gemaras we mentioned. A machshav, you plan to rob the bank and then nothing ever happened. So it's just in the world of thought. So that's nothing. But if you wanted to eat treif and you acted upon it, you actually ate food thinking it was treif. You did an action thinking that action was implementing your negative thought. You happened to get lucky that the flesh was kosher? No, this is a whole different level. You acted upon your thought. Let's read it together, number 4. It's a very clear distinction. The yesh b'chelik hamachshav, he says, in the chelik of thought, tzad achad, there's another side, shu tzorich mechil al das kulam. There is an area of thought where everyone agrees that one needs mechila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam shakol niyah b'dvaroi. Amen. L'fi ma she'omru zal, based on what the rabbis say. Who that is? B'mi shechashav la'asos aveira. If one intended to commit a crime, va'asa ma'isa, and they did an action. B'machshavas aveira, thinking it was a sin. One wanted to eat treif, and they're eating the flesh, and they're reveling in the flesh, you know. They're drooling. This is finally their chance to have the treif. It's like that bacher that heard about, chazer only gets malchus, get whipped. But chalev, the forbidden fat, is chorus. And the worse the punishment is the worse the crime. So imagine if you have a desire for a pork burger. Imagine chalev, the forbidden fats, carries chorus. He looks around, where's he going to find forbidden fats? Punk, the candle that was being used in the yeshiva, was made out of chalev. That was the wax, was fat, animal fat. So he runs over to it. He takes a chunk of this wax and he eats it and he consumes it. And what does he say? I don't see what people see in chalev, like the poor man's blintzes. Anyhow, but imagine someone actually gets a good piece of flesh, thinking it's treif, and they push it, acting upon the thought. Maybe they're even enjoying. They're literally enjoying it, and it's a whole psychological experience because in reality it's kosher food. But as far as their mind, they're actually cashing in on the Eloshin is damen. His damen means he happened to be lucky. Shoyamaisa mutter. Ke'inyan, for example, misha gama b'lechol chaylev. Look, he even gives the example of chaylev. Someone wants to eat chaylev, right? From all typhus, chaylev is the one. V'hoitzi machshav toilamais, and he did it. He actually got fat on the plate, and he dips it into sauce as well, right? And Eloshin is dam, and he happened to be lucky that chaticha was shuman, was kosher fat. But who achlov machshavas chav, he ate it thinking it was chaylev. Tzarachu, he needs slicha umechila al machshavto. He needs to be forgiven for his thought. Look at the next line. Hine she'im heyois, although hamaisa, the action that he did was eating kosher, davar lo yichulav alav, there's no obligation there. But tzarich slicha, he needs atonement. Al roya hakavana, for the negative intention. Why? Because he acted upon the action. This is the Meiri's chiluk, right? So it's a very powerful chiluk. It's the difference between this machshava in the air versus acting on a machshava. However, l'cha'ira, it's only an issue to act upon the machshava if you think the action itself is prohibited. But let's say you act upon the thought, but you know the action is mutter. So what would that mean? Eating kosher food thinking it's treif? I have a better example. What if somebody's intimate with their spouse, but they have in mind somebody else? They have in mind somebody else, right? And in fact, there are many in the Goyish world, therapists and others that advise people to fantasize and to imagine somebody else when they're with their spouse. Now, as far as Torah is concerned, nothing could be further from what's appropriate, from what's holy. But such a case, so there's a negative machshava, they're imagining somebody else, but they don't think that they're acting upon that machshava. They know that they're with their spouse, but they're thinking about somebody. It comes together with an action, but it's a kosher action. So you see what I'm saying? It sounds like I'm splitting a hair, but I think it's very clear. In other words, the Meiri said there's stam machshava, that's just a thought in the wind. There's acting upon your thought, thinking that the food itself is treif. But then there's a middle case where you acted upon your thought, so you're thinking the negative thought while you're doing an action. But the action you know is mutter. And I think that would be lenient. That would not be the case of the woman in the Nazir. That would not be the case of when you think it's treif. The issue the Meiri is saying is only if you act upon your thought, thinking the action itself is prohibited. Look, jump to the next page for a second. Number 13. Sorry, it's out. This is out of order. You're all too comfortable over here, so we got to jump to the next page. Number 13. It's a Yalkut Shemaini. It's a Yalkut Shemaini on Yirmiyahu. Okay, so we're reading Yirmiyahu now. It's the 3 weeks. And the pasuk that the Yalkut quotes is in Yechezkel, but it's in Yalkut Shemaini on Yirmiyahu. Ha'isha hamana efes tachash isha, a woman who commits adultery under her husband. So frek the Medrash, what does that mean? V'chiyesh isha, do you have a woman who's mana efes underneath her husband? If she's with her husband, she's not being manayef, she's not committing adultery. What does it mean while she's married? Then the words are extra. Just say a woman is mana'efes means while she's married. Like what does tachas isha mean? While she's married? Says the Medrash, no. Amar Rabbi Seinu. It's af ish is talking about a woman who's misyached with her husband, and he's mishamish with her, but she's thinking of another man. Vihi noisena seinel ba'acher b'shas tashmisha. She thinks about another man while she's with her husband. Af hu niyuf. That is niyuf. The Medrash says that is niyuf. Even though she's only fantasizing about another man, but it's coming together with an action. See, the stam fantasizing, stam azay, whatever, fantasy is fine. Here, the woman's acting upon it, but the action is mutter with her husband. She knows the action is mutter, but the Medrash seems to say this is already beyond just fantasizing on your own. This is somewhat acting upon the fantasy. But nonetheless, I believe very strongly it falls short of the case we started off with when someone does an action thinking the action itself is also. But you do see from the Medrash it's more than just thought. Okay? Continues the Medrash, a certain Arabic king asked Rabbi Akiva, he said, I'm a Kushis, I'm black, my wife is black, the Yoldali ben Lavan, she had a white son. So he tells Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi, Sa'ani Harga, I'm going to kill her because this is clear that that this child is not mine. Shema Zansalai. Even though he wasn't sure, but he's perhaps she was Mazana. So Rabbi Akiva told him, hang on a second. Do you have paintings in your home? Or images in your home? He said, yeah. Are they white or black? So the king says they're white. So Rabbi Akiva says, I got it. Your wife was not unfaithful. When you were with her, she was looking at those white paintings and therefore it affected the color of her child. And he told him, you think this is impossible? So learn from the sheep of Yaakov that from the sticks that he peeled, right, and they saw the different colors, so they would change literally the color of the offspring of Yaakov's sheep in Parashas Vayetze. And Hoyd Melech Haravi, the Arabic king, conceded to Rabbi Akiva, and he said, you know what? I will not kill my wife. So Rabbi Akiva saved the queen. So, but you see from the Medrash though that thinking about somebody else while you act with the spouse, it's more than just thought. Because or else the Medrash should just say that anyone who thinks about niyuf is niyuf. No. It has to be more than just machshava. But as long as it's accompanied with an action, even though she knows the action is mutter. But nonetheless, I think it falls short of the more serious case of when someone acts upon their negative intention, thinking what they're doing is asur. Okay? So far, so good. Let's go back to the first page. Okay. Comes the Chidoi number 3 in his Midbar Kedemos. The Chidah says, Machshava ra, a negative thought, Eina Kodesh Baruch Hu Mitzarfa Lamaisa. Hashem does not count it like an action. He says, Kosav Harav Mishkenes Yankiv, Im Avar Vishana, if a person becomes habitual in committing a certain crime, then when they start to plan it, they get pinned for the planning. Mitzvah of Gamma Machshava, then the Eibusha does pin them for the planning, even if they don't do it a third time. But they plan to do it a third time. Says the Chidor, it's a Chiddush for Tzorach Sa'ad to the Soimchai. This is a Chiddush, and I need to verify. We need evidence for this. The Chidor is not so sure that this is true. Maybe forever, even once someone did the crime 100 times, each time you only get pinned once you actually do it. The Chidor is not so sure. But then he quotes from the Aspaklaria Ha'Me'ira, who writes that Beganei Din Ha'elyin Manishin Ala Machshava. That even if down here the Eibusha lets a negative thought slip, but when you go above to Gan Eden Ha'elyon, not Gan Eden Ha'tachta, Gan Eden Ha'elyon, you're going to be answerable for all the thoughts. Then you're going to be answerable for all the thoughts. Right. Okay. Now, I have to mention something from Rabbi Yosef Irgaz. Rabbi Yosef Irgaz was one of the greatest Kabbalists in Italy, 1685, the Shomer Emunim, 1730, the Shomer Emunim. And we've mentioned him before. He's the one, he really pushed for Tzimtzum Lav Kipshutai, that God did not remove himself from the space of creation, rather he concealed himself. We had a long shir about that, the primordial black hole. And he took on, it was the Mishnas Chassidim, who believed Tzimtzum Kipshutai, and we discussed all the different opinions there. So Rabbi Yosef Irgaz has a sefer of halachas called Divrei Yosef, Responsa. And in it he says the following, and the truth is, it's muchrich, we would have guessed it ourselves, but it's just nice to see that he spells it out. When we say machshava ra, Hashem does not count it, it's talking about, let's say you want to rob a bank. You plan to wear shatnez, right? Do those types of aveiros. But there are certain thoughts that are in and of themselves a sin, even if one does not act upon them. For example, promiscuous thoughts, gilui arayos, those types of thoughts. It says in the Chumash, "V'nishmarta mikol davar ra," right? And Alter Rebbe quotes that in Tanya, that one violates that pasuk if one harbors negative thoughts in that arena of forbidden relations. And as the Gemara says, "Shelo yahara b'yom," we learn from there that you shouldn't think about these things. So gilui arayos and avodah zarah as well, but gilui arayos is a bit of an exception, where if one entertains the thoughts of forbidden relations, that's a crime in and of itself. The Gemara is talking about if one plans to rob a bank, or I'll tell you this, what my gut says. If somebody is trying to locate a zayna, and they're making plans in their mind how they'll find the zayna, so you're not thinking about the promiscuous relations itself, the machshava is similar to robbing a bank. How can I find the zayna? How will I get her number? How will we make a time? How does it fit with my schedule? That, I think, Rabbi Yosef Irgaz may agree, that's just a machshava ra. That's just, Hashem doesn't count that. But if one actually thinks about the zivug, actually about intimacy, that's a crime in and of itself. Okay, so I just want to put that out. So there's a difference of even thinking about znus. If you're trying to arrange the znus, that could be like thinking to rob a bank. But if you think about the znus itself, that the Divrei Yosef says, that the Eibishter will pin you, that's b'chlal not our discussion here. Fine. We continue. Along these thoughts, there's a Gemara in Yom and number 5. You're comparing thought to action, or contrasting between thought versus action. Amar Reish Lakish, we'll just read it. Toiv mara einayim be'isha yoser megufay shalmaisa. It's toiv, it's better for a person just to gaze at a woman than the actual act of intimacy. And this is something which is rampant these days with the internet, that there's a simple svara behind it. It doesn't take any energy. It's passive, and Reish Lakish says just watching Mare Einayim is better megufay shalmaisa. It's mamash a clear Gemara. Interesting. Shenemre, the pasuk says, Toiv Mare Einayim mahalach nafish. Better for the eyes to see than for the soul to actually go on the journey. Right? Why is it people, they schwitz while they're playing sports, and you have a whole arena full of spectators, yeah? And the people who are playing, they're schwitzing and they're dying from the heat and everything, and everyone sitting in the arena is enjoying. They're busy clapping. Why do you think all the spectators are clapping? They're loving it. They're sitting there just sitting and enjoying. They're sitting and loving it. They don't have to do anything, so they're clapping. They're applauding the fact they're having a wonderful time. In a way, sometimes it's more geschmack to watch a game of sport than to actually play the game. Okay? That's a more, I guess, kid-friendly analogy than one of Reish Lakish. But Reish Lakish is saying the fact of the matter is that the machshava, the experience of the mind, it's not just that it's passive, you don't have to act. The experience of the mind can be greater, can be deeper, more pleasurable than the experience of than the actual gufay shel maisa. It's incredible. In number 6, there's another Gemara in Yuma, much earlier on, a famous statement, 4 words, Hirhude Aveira kashul ma'aveira. Thinking about an Aveira is worse than the Aveira itself. An interesting expression. The thought to commit a sin is worse than actually doing the sin. Now let's assume it's talking about a promiscuity, forbidden relations, that's how it's understood. So it means the thought, if someone entertains the thought of doing it, is worse than the actual act. So Rashi says, look at Rashi right to the left, Rashi says, Taivas noshim, the desire for women, koshim, are harsher on the body. Lahakchish is, to weaken you, yoiser megufay shalmaisa. The act itself can weaken you. Al titein lenoshim chaylecha, don't give your strength to women. The actual act can weaken you, but much more detrimental to your health could be the taivas noshim, lovesick. And the desire can eat and ebb away at you more than the act itself. Which, l'chayra is, right? That's something everyone can understand. So Rashi is not talking about what's a bigger sin. It's just saying what's harsher for you. Why does Rashi learn that way? Maybe the Gemara just means thinking about it is worse than doing it. That can't be. Why? Well, the actual Aveira could carry chorus and this and that. A thought is just a thought. A thought is just a thought. So Rashi says this is the pshat. Because or else you're just dealing with a machshava ra. If it's mamish telling you what's a bigger sin, the thought or the action, didn't we see in number 2, an evil thought Hashem doesn't consider like a deed? So say, hang on. Rabbi Yosef Irgaz said, we're mixing apples and oranges. The evil thought is nothing, is generally, but when someone actually thinks about thoughts of intimacy, those thoughts are an actual crime. On that we don't say, this is a different type of machshava, a different kettle of fish. It's a different, here the thought itself is the crime. Yeah, but still, you can't say it's worse than the actual action. That just can't be. So therefore Rashi says that the pshat is it's harder for your body. The Rambam in the Moira Nevuchim gives a pshat, the way it's understood by some, that the Gemara is saying the Eibishter has a bigger issue with one thinking about forbidden intimacy versus the actual act of forbidden intimacy. Why? Taka, the actual act might carry the chorus and not the thought. But says the Rambam like this, the greatest possession that a Yid or a human has is their chachma, their understanding, their mind. When one corrupts their mind, if someone fantasizes an Aveira, it's an intellectual experience of the mind. You're corrupting the greatest thing the Eibishter gave you. Whereas the action, you're corrupting your body. Fine. But here you're corrupting like your soul, you're corrupting your chachma, you're corrupting your mind, the nefesh. So that's how the Rambam learns. So according to the Rambam, in a way, towards God, the hirhur is worse than the Aveira. But this is all talking about a thought, actually entertaining thoughts of forbidden intimacy. Where Rabbi Yosef Irgas says, we don't apply here, machshava ra is not considered like an action. This machshava ra is serious. But nonetheless, it shouldn't be as much as the action itself. So for that, Rashi and the Rambam give an explanation of what the Gemara refers to. Fine. So, another proof to this, that a thought, an actual thought of intimacy, is considered a crime unto itself, and it does not fall under the general rule of machshava ra, it's just a machshava ra, is a Gemara in number 7, this week's parsha. After the war against Midian, the Jews, they return from the war, and they bring all the women from Midian. Moshe became angry. He was angered, right, at the generals. Amar Rav Nachman, we're number 7. Amar Rabba Baravua. Amar Moshe said to the Yidden, Shema chazartim l'kulkulchem arishon. In the end of Parshas Balak, Bilam gives the advice to Balak to get the girls from Moav and Midian to entice the Jews into promiscuity, and then Balak goes further and has the Jews fall into Avodah Zarah. And how many Yidden die because of that? 24,000 in a plague. And the Yerushalmi Sanhedrin says about 170,000 were killed by the courts. Bilam struck us hard. That's part of the reason. This week Hashem says, take vengeance against Midian. But then they bring the women back. So Moshe's like, what's going on? You're back with the Midianite women. You're back with the Midianite women. So Amrullah, they said, no. Loi nifkad mimenu ish. They say in the pasuk, nobody died. What they meant to say is no Jew committed any forbidden relations with a Midianite woman. So we just brought them back from the battlefield. So Moshe says, if that's the case and no one did anything wrong, so they brought gifts. Imken kapara lama. Why are you donating things? Why were they donating? So they told Moshe, Im midei Aveira yatzanu, midei hiru lo yatzanu. It's true, nobody cashed in on their desire on the battlefield with Midianite women. But to say no one had a desire, and no one actually entertained their thoughts, that we can't say. Plenty of people entertained their thoughts, and they were going to go ahead with it, and at the last moment they restrained themselves. Gavaldik, they restrained themselves, but there was still a hirur. Machshava ra is nothing. No, says Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, not a thought of actual hirur. A thought of intimacy, this is different. V'nishmarta mikol dovra, you can't harbor these forbidden thoughts. They're also in and onto themselves. Fine. So that's just more evidence to that. In number 8 is just a Gemara in Menachos. Whenever one is learning the sugya of thought versus action, this is a prime source. So it just had to be on the page. And the case is the following. Shom, if somebody heard, okay, we have Atzala over here, so this is it's on Shabbos, and you hear, God forbid, Tava Tinik Bayam, a child is drowning in the water, right? They say when the Rebbe was young, he jumped into the water to save a child. There's a story, while he was still living in Nikolaev, he was born, then later he moved to Yekaterinoslav. Apparently it happened when he was in Nikolaev, don't know exactly. When he was younger, he saved a child who was drowning. A well-known story of the Chidah, that the Chidah, in one of his many travels, he came across a child that was mamish drowning in the water. And he swam, he jumped in, he saved the kid's life. The mother was nearby and she was like, Rabbi, I owe you the world. She was from the royal family. What could I give you? So the Chidah says that the king, who was, I don't know, her father, uncle, grandfather, something, the king has a big library. There are many Jewish manuscripts in the library. I would like to have permission to go in and study the manuscripts. Oh yeah? Okay. So that's a good memory. So and the story didn't see if I say the same detail. So she says you point to ask the one it's a tender question because that library is very dear to the king and usually people don't get access. We'll see what we could do. The Chidah was granted permission to enter, but he could not take anything out with him. Neither could he bring any writing material. He could go and glance. You want to go and look around for your own pleasure, good. Nothing goes out, and no intellectual theft, no chassidische gnevas of writing. Chassidische gneva is you take out someone's manuscripts, and you write it over, you copy, your intellectual theft. So he went in, and he looked at some manuscripts, and he memorized it off by heart. And he left, and he wrote it down. He did it a few times. So he was able to get lots of the information out through his incredible memory. Anyhow, back to the story over here. There's, God forbid, a kid drowning in the water. So the fisherman, he's going fishing. Now he heard there's a kid there. But he's like, all right, I'm here fishing anyhow. If the kid comes up, beautiful. And he spreads his net to catch fish. The hell dog him and the fish come up. Chayiv. He's chayiv for breaking Shabbos, for hunting on Shabbos, for tzad, for hunting. Because he wanted to hunt fish, and he did, to catch fish, to trap fish. But says the Gemara, what if lahal is time he wanted to catch fish, but when he drew the net up, guess what was inside? The hell of tinik v'dog, the kid and fish. Rabba Omar Potter, Rabba says he's Potter from breaking Shabbos. He wanted to trap fish, and he trapped fish, but he also saved the kid's life. It's one action of drawing up the net. And that action was kosher, he saved the kid's life. So all there was in his heart was a negative thought. He wanted to break Shabbos. And he acted upon it. Yeah. But the action itself, he's not going to get killed in Bezin. Rava says Chayiv, he gets killed in Bezin. Rabba Omar Potter, Rabba says he's Potter because Zil Basar Ma'aseh follow the action. Rava Omar Chayiv, Zil Basar Machshavtoi. Rabba says, look at the action. The fact is, when he drew up the net, there was a kid in there. Saved the kid's life. Rava says you follow his action, his thought, and therefore his chayiv. But even according to Rava, the case was he wanted to trap fish, and he trapped fish and the kids. What if he would have only trapped the kid? What if he wanted to get fish, but he only picked up the kid? Then Rava would agree as Potter, because he didn't break Shabbos. He needs to have the kid and fish in the net. And then Rava says he caught fish, he wanted to catch fish, he gets killed in Bezdin, he broke Shabbos. And Rabba says no, the action is still remedied by the fact that there was a kid in the net. Because it's one act of drawing up the net, saving the kid's life. The thought, it's just a thought. And Allah here follows Rabba. Even though Rava was a student of Rabba. And originally there was a rule, Ein halacha ketalmid b'makayim harav. You never paskin like the student in the place of the Rebbe. You always paskin like the older generation. That stopped in the days of Abaya and Rava. We started paskin like the student. And there's a big question, okay, so after Abaya and Rava's days, you follow the later generation. Halacha kebasra. But what if Abaya and Rava themselves argue against their Rebbes? Like that generation itself. Is it only after them that we follow the later generation? Or even Abai and Rava themselves against their teachers? Like Rava against Rabba. So here's an example where the Rambam Paskins like Rabba and not Rava. But some suggest that here Rava, well, there might be other reasons. Maybe Rava was saying his opinion as a question to Rabba. You know, when it's like, if it's clear that Rava he was asking a question to Rabba, then you would still go with the Rebbe. But either way, what does Gemara tell you? That this guy is off the hook because the action was an action of saving the kid's life. He had a machshava raw to break Shabbos, and not he cashed in on it. He followed through, thinking he didn't know he was picking up the. He had in mind lahalas dogim. Punkt, he got lucky. So Taki needs a kapara. It would be like the case of the chaylev or the woman by the nazar. A negative intention followed through, but you're not going to kill the guy because at the end of the day, the action was a lucky action. And yet Rava says, no, you follow the machshava. Very interesting debate. Fine. What's the upshot of all this? The upshot of all this where we're holding is, generally a machshava Rav, someone intended to sin, but nothing came of it. It's to the wind, Rashi says. The Meiri in Kedushin says, no, the Eibishter will hold you somewhat accountable, but on a small scale. Then there's a machshava Ra, like thinking about intimacy, forbidden intimacy, where that is a crime in and unto itself, like we saw a few sources. And then you have what we began with, when one acts upon the forbidden thought, thinking what they're doing is fulfilling that forbidden desire, but punk, they got lucky, the treif of food wasn't treif, the husband annulled the vow of the wife, and nonetheless, one needs atonement for that. Okay? One needs atonement for that. Why? Because they acted upon the thought. So, the Brisker Rav, the son of Reb Chaim Brisker, says, the reason why, if one acted upon their forbidden thought, and they got lucky and the thing was permissible, the reason why they need atonement is because it's as if they did the forbidden act. Not completely, but in some degree, it's as if they did, since they cashed in on their thought, thinking the food was treif, and eating it thinking it was treif, it's as if the action in some degree was forbidden. Because the Rambam paskins, in the case of the woman about the Nazir who didn't know her husband annulled the vow, she actually gets whipped. Not biblical malchus, not biblically, because at the end the husband annulled the neder. Rabbinically, makas mardus, rabbinically. And there's two ways to understand the Rambam. The simple way is that she gets makas mardus because she had the forbidden thought. Generally, machshava ra doesn't count, but here she acted upon it. Now, the action happened to be mutter. Fine, so she won't get biblical malchus. But since she had the temerity, the audacity to cash in on her thought, she needs to get some repercussions. But the Brisker Rav says no. He thinks the pshat is that when someone acts upon the forbidden thought, in some way it's like they did the forbidden action. And I think there's a raya perhaps to that. One of the greatest Sephardic scholars 250 years ago, his name was Rabbi Yosef Alagazi. Okay? His father was Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Alagazi, who was a Rav in Izmir, and then in the early 1700s makes his way from Izmir to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Yisrael. And he was the one that published the Sefer Chemdas Yomim, right? The most controversial Kabbalistic Sefer we spoke about, who Rabbi Yaakov Emden was certain is from the pen of Nathan of Gaza, Nosson HaZosi, and therefore is treif, etc., etc. But this Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Alagazi, he had a son, Rabbi Yomtov, the Maharit Alagazi, and he was a very close friend of the Chidah. The two of them were students in Kabbalah of the Rashash. The Rashash, Reb Sholem Sherebi, is from Taiman, from Yemen. And the Rashash, the exact year he was born is under dispute. The Rashash, he had some incident where he was in peril. He said, Eibush, if you get me out of this jam, I'm heading to Israel. He survived, he heads to Israel, and he became ultimately the head of a yeshiva called Beis Kel, the yeshiva of Kabbalists of Beis Kel, which had about 40 Kabbalists that studied there. Amongst the 40, there were 12 who were super Kabbalists, and the Rashash of Sholem Sherebi, he was a great, great Kabbalist, and he led this. The Rabbeim, the Rebbe quotes him a number of times. The Rashab mentions him in Ayin Beis, no less, about something that he writes about different levels in Odom Kadmon, in Ak. You don't ask me about that. And the Rashash said about himself, actually, that he is a reincarnation of the Arizal. He kocht very much in the works of the Arizal. The Rashash says, I only learn pretty much Zoyar and the works of Reb Chaim Vital, nothing else. But then he fleshed out his own, some of his own, I guess, Hysophists, ideas, explanations, elaborations, etc. He has a siddur, the siddur of the Rashash. And amongst his students were the Chida, and this Maharit Alagazi, Rabbi Yom Tov Alagazi. Although Rabbi Yom Tov Alagazi was a student in Kabbalah, he's most well known for his Nigla. He was a Rav, he was the Rishon Letzion for some time, which was the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. Now it's the chief Sephardic rabbi in Eretz Yisrael. He used to be the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. And he was Av Bezin, the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. He was an incredible person. It's interesting because after the Rashash passed away in 1777, the Maharit Alagazi actually succeeded the Rashash as the Rosh Yeshiva of the Kabbalist Yeshiva. So not only he studied Kabbalah, he was a king in Kabbalah too. He's not known for that. Furthermore, there is a story, which is written in a number of places, that at some point the Rashash was determined to bring Mashiach, and the yeshiva had 40 students, right? The elite were 12. From the 12, there was the elite, Shebi elite. The Rashash and two of his students got together. One was the Chida, and the other was Reb Chaim de la Rosa. De la Rosa. The Rose. And the three of them spent time in ascetic behavior, fasting and davening and crying and storming the heavens to bring the redemption. And as they were getting close, a heavy cloud appeared and they heard a voice, and the voice said, "You're being doichik the cat, you're trying to push the cats. You have no permission for that. You have no permission for that. The three of you will be punished. One of you will die young. One of you will be sentenced to many years of traveling abroad, exile, and the third one will be forever banished from Jerusalem." So they made a goyrel. On the Rashash fell that he's going to die young. And he died, according to the dates that we have, he was 57. I guess he would have lived younger. He would have lived longer. On the Chidah fell the goyrel to spend many years traveling abroad. And on Reb Chaim de la Rosa, his lot was to be banished from Jerusalem. So he was banished from Jerusalem, and he didn't go back until he passed away. Right before Reb Chaim de la Rosa passed away, he wrote works in Kabbalah. Torah HaChacham, I think that's what it's called. The Torah of his Rebbe, the Rashash. Apparently he was very, very poor, had a hard life, and he wrote his work on small fragments of paper he was able to find. Never published his work while he was alive. After he passed away, the work was given over to somebody to try and copy and turn it into a nice handwriting. But this guy just made a mumbo jumbo of all the small, so like lots of things were out of order. Some scholars came and tried to study it and said it's impossible. The matik, the one that copied it, just mixed and mismatched. So and it was very difficult to learn. But this Reb Chaim de la Rosa, before he passed away, he told his students, after I die, I want you to carry out the 4 mitzvos of Bezdin on my body. There's an idea, some Kabbalists were into it, that if the body suffers, the more shame the body suffers down here, the less shame the soul suffers above. Kishayesh din lamata, ain din lamata. There's judgment down here, there's no judgment up there. And he said, please carry out the 4 types of deaths on my body. The students refused, they did not want. How could they do that to their Rebbe? They were carrying the body back to Yerushalayim. Now that he's dead, he's able to go back to Yerushalayim. And they were going to bury him, I think in Har HaZeisim, near the Rashash. They were attacked by a group of Arabs. So the students put the body down and they ran for their lives. When the Arabs had left, the students came back to the body and they saw that the Arabs had burnt part of the body, had cut it up, had thrown it around, rocks on top of the body. Mamish, there was shreifa, there was hereg, there was skila, everything happened to the body. And these students, they were shattered, completely broken. They buried their Rebbe, and that night, one of the students had a dream, and Reb Chaim came, and he was smiling, and he said, you see, I wanted this. Ritzoyin Yerei of Yaseh, the Eibush was going to carry it out. I was hoping it would have been through you. You chose not to do it, so the Eibush to arrange a group of Arabs, but it was for my benefit. I'm happy that they did it. So anyhow, you see that Rashash did this with the Chidon Reb Chaim de la Rosa, not with Reb Yom Tov Alagazi, who did succeed the Rashash as leading the yeshiva in Beiskel, but he wasn't part of this group for whatever reason. Bechlal, the Maharit Alagazi, is well known for his nigla. What happened was he had to travel. The Maharit Alagazi traveled. In fact, he famously met the Chassam Sofer in Germany, in Frankfurt. The Chassam Sofer was young, a teenager. And he met the Maharit Alagazi. And the Maharit Alagazi, while he was traveling around, going from place to place, he visited many communities, Ashkenaz and Sfard, many communities. He came across a few old manuscripts of Rishonim that, until that point, were not printed. He came across the Yad, the Rameh, the Rishon, the Rameh, Rav Meir Halevi Abelafia, wrote a sefer on Masechta Sanhedrin called Yod Rama, or Yad Ramah, or Yad Rameh. So they found those manuscripts and they got it printed. In addition, he found a manuscript of the Ramban, the laws of Bechoros, and some other things. And he was so excited, he printed it with a flowing commentary of his own. Very deep, sharp commentary. And the Maharit Alagazi became famous for that, for the work he wrote on the Ramban's Hilchos Bechoros. The Ramban, Nachmanides. In fact, there was an old piece of advice a great scholar once gave, that if you want to become a lamd and a scholar, so okay, you learn Tanakh, you learn Mishnah, you learn Gemara, but after you learn Gemara, like what are the real lamdish sfarim you should learn? So he said three things. You have to learn, there's a sefer called Maharit, not Maharit Alagazi, but Rabbi Yosef Trani, who was earlier, who was 100 years earlier. The Maharit, Rabbi Yosef Trani, his tshuvas, his response, if you study them, it'll teach you how to think, it'll teach you Svara, how to think. The Maharit Alagazi, his work on the Bechoros of the Ramban, will teach you sharpness, teach you charifis. And the third thing was a sefer called Shar HaMelech. There's a book called Shar HaMelech on the Rambam, written by a great Sephardi Gaon. For some reason, for some odd reason, the sefer is rarely learnt. It's rarely quoted, although it's absolutely fabulous. And the reason to learn that sefer was primarily, he'll give you all the knowledge you have to know. What he quotes over there, the Shar HaMelech, what he quotes, and everything is so clear. He quotes from all the Achronim and in his Pulpulim he has on the Rambam. So this was the tripod for the segel for success. The Maharit's responsa for Svara, the Maharit Alagazi on Bechoros of the Ramban for Charifis, for sharpness, and the Shar HaMelech for Bekiyas, just for extensive knowledge. Anyhow, so back to the Maharit Rabbi Yom Tov Alagazi, okay? So the Maharit Alagazi, he wrote a sefer of responsa, Kedushas Yom Tov. His name was Yom Tov. And in it, he's dealing with the following case. Are you ready? Ready? There is a woman, a married woman, and she was mezana with another man. She was mezana with another man. Now, her husband had been out of town. Her claim was, well, I thought if my husband's out of town, it's okay to commit adultery. Great excuse. So the rule generally is if a married woman commits adultery, she is forbidden to her husband and to the paramour and to the boil, to the man she was intimate with, forever, biblically. She's forbidden biblically to both of them on pain of malchus if she's with them. So this story, the woman, okay, her claim that she thought it was mutter because her husband's out of town, that's ridiculous. So she should be usher to her husband and to this guy forever. Here's the issue. It turns out her husband actually died a couple weeks before. So she Bechlal was a widow when she was with this other man. But she didn't know that. She thought she was committing adultery. She thought it was okay because her husband's out of town. Okay? But she thought she was doing an act of immorality. Okay? Turns out she wasn't. It's like someone who had kavanah to eat treif. It turns out it was lamb, like the beginning of our shir, number 1. So you would think that she can now marry this man that she was with. She's a widow. It turns out she was with the other guy when she was allowed to be with him, as far as her Eishes Ish issue. So the Maharit Alagazi says, no, I want to forbid her. Why? Because since she thought it was wrong, it's like she'd somewhat committed the crime itself. It's like the Brisker Rav that I mentioned before, who says that when the woman thinks she's a Nazir and violates, you know why she gets Rabbinic Malchus? Because it's like she violated the vow, even though in truth the husband had annulled it. But since she cashed in on her thought, the action in some degree is defined by her thought. And the Maharit Alagazi says this. Now the truth is, the Maharit says the real reason he would prohibit her is based on a knas. He would punish her. Just like any woman who was truly married, if she commits adultery, she's forever usher to the boil, to the man she was with. So to this woman, she thought she was married. I want to penalize her and prohibit her. Now, how could you throw out just to make such a prohibition? So he has a Nemuke Yosef who says, and the Ritva also says this, if you have 2 brothers, Reuven and Shimon, Reuven passes away without kids. So his wife, Aveira, she's a Shemeres Yavam. She's bound to the brother Shimon. She needs to do Yibum, marry him, or Chalitza. Until then, until she does that, she's bound to him to the point, if she lives with another man, she'll get Malchus. She won't get killed or chorus like regular Gili Arayas, but she Loisia Eishes Ameis Hachutza, she can't marry another man, there's Malchus. The question is, if she is with another man, does she become usher now to her brother-in-law that she was going to do Yibum with? Bechlal, when she is attached to Shimon after her husband Reuven died, how do you look at this? Is it that her original marriage is still there, just in a lower form? Or it's no, her marriage is over, but God created a new link between her and her brother-in-law Shimon? This is a question that Rabbi Yosef Engel deals with at length, and the Rogatchover as well. And there's many ramifications. And one of them is this question: if she commits adultery, does she become usher to Shimon? So Masechta Soita, there's a big debate. And how he paskins a big debate. But comes the Nemuke Yosef and says, even if she's still mutter to her brother-in-law Shimon, she's going to be usher to the man she was with forever. Should Shimon do chalitza to her, or marry her and then die or divorce her, she can never marry the man she was with again. Why? Knas. We punish her. So says Maharit Alagazi, I have precedent to create this knas. Now the truth of the matter is like this. There is this halacha, when a married woman commits adultery, she's usher to her husband and to the boil forever. The question is, does this have to be a package deal? Do both things have to come together, or you can have one without the other? What's an example? The Maharas Sasson was one of the great Sephardic poskim centuries ago. He asked the following question. You have a married woman, okay? Yenta, and she was Mazana already 5 years ago with a certain man. So she's already usher to her husband and to that man. And now another guy off the street, Yankel Shmerel, comes and spends the night with her. Does she become usher to Yankel Shmerel now? She's already usher to her husband. So during the second union, half of the package isn't going to take effect. She won't get another prohibition to her husband, she's already usher. But will she become now usher to Yankel Shmerel? So the Maharas Sasson wants to say no, it's a package deal. You have to have both together. You can't have one without the other. That's the Maharas Sasson. He wants to push that argument. The Mishnah Lamelech, also one of the greatest Sephardic Gaonim 300 years ago, the Mishnah Lamelech says a similar case. You have a woman who's married, right? And then she's raped. She's still mutter to her husband, unless she's married to a Kohen. If she's married to a non-Kohen and she was raped, she's mutter to her husband. So does she become usher, though, to that man who violated her? Should her husband die or divorce her, could she marry, for whatever reason, want to marry that guy? Do I say, on the one hand, he was with her while she was married, she's usher to him. On the other hand, it's not a package deal because she didn't become usher to her husband. It's the very same question. Or not even a case of violation of rape, but imagine a woman comes home, she went to the bedroom, she thought it was her husband. It turns out it wasn't her husband, it was somebody else. So she's a shoygeg. She remains mutter to her husband because it was done without intention. But let's say the man knew who this woman was. So he knows what's going on, he was mazed. But she was shoygeg, the same question. That intimacy does not prohibit her to her husband. Does she come prohibited to the man? The Minchas Chinuch in number 9, just because to throw a little bit of lumdus into the situation, says another difference based on the Maras Son is this. You ready for this? I'll say it outside. So you have a soita, a woman, a married woman who's been secluded with another man, right? And after she was warned, do we know what happened behind closed doors? No. It's a suffix. Maybe they were playing, playing chess. Or maybe they were intimate. We don't know. Nonetheless, the Torah says you have to be concerned that she was intimate because she went into seclusion after she was warned not to. And she becomes prohibited to the husband until she drinks the magical Saita waters. Now, this prohibition, although it's based on a doubt, the Torah considers it like a certainty. It's not like a regular Sophic Isser that you have to be machmir. Here the Torah considers like a certainty. The Shev Shmaitzer, one of the greatest books on Lumdus, in the very beginning already states this. It's different than all other questionable prohibitions. The Torah considers this Saita to be certainly prohibited, not just prohibited based on doubt. Pardon me. What would be a difference? When there's a prohibition based on doubt, what if a certain individual says, I happen to know that it's mutter? They're allowed to consume it. Bezdin won't force them not to. If they say they know, they know. So if the Saita would only be based on a doubt, and the paramour, the man that she was secluded with, says, I know for a fact we just played games, he would be allowed to marry her. But by the Torah saying that the suspicion we have becomes definite, so then Bezdin doesn't allow someone to say, oh, well, I know that it didn't happen, and we don't believe you. We believe it happened. So says the Minchas Chinuch like this. Hold on. You ready for this? You'll be licking your fingers. 2 men seclude with this married woman, and they're only in the room for enough time for one of them to do the Isser. Okay? The truth is, he says, sorry, no, even better. According to the Maras Sasson, he says, even if there was enough time for both of them to do the Isser. But according to the Maharit, look at number 9, L'shittas Maras Sasson. Now then, you saw that, now I'll say the rest outside. No, there was time for both of them to do the crime. They're in there for a half hour. Enough for them both to do the crime. But according to the Maras Sasson, only one of them becomes prohibited to her. Because whoever's first prohibits her to her husband and to him, whoever's second, since he can't re-prohibit her to her husband, so you don't have that half of the package deal, you don't have the other, doesn't become prohibited to him. No, she's still Eishes, and if they did it, no. But as far as the Isser to the boil, as far as not being able to marry him hereafter. So one of them, we don't know who. Now here you can't say that the Torah says they're both also with certainty. Because it's impossible. We know halachically only one of them is, according to the Maras Sasson. When do we say a Saita is like a certainty? When we don't know what happened and she violated the warning and she went in seclusion, the Torah says, until she drinks the water, we're certain she committed the crime. But if it's impossible to be a certainty, like when there's 2 people and only one of them could be prohibited, not the other one, so then you can't say it remains a suffix. So therefore, if one of the men would say, I know for a fact that I was number 2, or that I didn't do it at all, we would believe him. based on the general rule, whenever something's also out of doubt, if someone says, I know for a fact it's mutter, it's mutter. Because in this Saita case, you can't say it becomes definite, because we know for sure one of them is mutter.
Double suffix if she did anything. And if she
But that becomes a vadai. That becomes a vadai by a Saita.
Because of the
Yeah. But the Vort is both, if they would say that they're bori, they're certain. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting, Minchas Chinuch. Now, the truth is that one of the most famous debates in halacha, we've mentioned many times, was the debate of Rabbeinu Tam and his student, the Bar Mordechai, about a woman, a Jewish woman who was married, who went frei, lived with a Goyish man. Then she becomes frum again. Her husband divorces her. The guy converted, right? The perfect case, right? Now she wants to marry the guy. And the question is, but he was committed adultery with her when she was married to Betel. She's ushered to him forever. Rabbeinu Tam says no. It doesn't apply to a guy. That's what Rabbeinu Tam says. It doesn't apply to he said it's okay. And his student, the Bar Mordechai, said, rubbish. Of course it applies by a guy as well, because Esther told Mordechai that now that I'm going into Achashverosh's room willingly, I'll become usher to you. So you see that the guy prohibits her to her husband. And therefore it's a package deal. If she becomes prohibited to her husband, she becomes prohibited to the guy. And everyone asks, what's Rabbeinu Tam going to do with that story of Esther and Mordechai? Esther to Gemara and Megillah, she said clearly she'll become usher to Mordechai. Rabbeinu Tam's going to have to say it's not a package deal. The guy can ask her prohibit the woman to her husband. Achashverosh could ask her Esther to Mordechai, but the guy doesn't become usher to her. So you see that a Rabbeinu Tam's going to have to say it's not a package deal. His student will say it is. It's deeper than that, because the Rosh paskins like Rabbeinu Tam, but for a different reason. The Rosh says, you know why it doesn't apply to a guy? Because the guy is already usher to. When this woman spent that night with the guy, she was usher to him anyways. So the din that she should now be usher to the paramour couldn't take effect because she's already usher to him. The din of being usher to the boil can only take effect if that man was mutter, and now you did adultery with him, you become usher to him. But if he was a guy, he's already usher. So the new Isser can't take effect. The second Isser can't take effect. That's the reason. So it's for different. The Mordechai says another Svara is because when the guy converts, he's no longer that guy. He's a newborn. The Beis Yosef on the tour quotes from the Orches Chaim that the Psak of Rabbeinu Tam should be thrown out the window because everybody disagreed with him. In Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Kaira quotes Rabbeinu Tam. Yesh Oimim. He quotes Rabbeinu Tam. He doesn't even quote a dissenting opinion. Very interesting. You might like this stuff. Listen to this. The Ramah has a din. Just throw it in because I can't hold myself back. The Ramah has a din that, unfortunate case, a guy, Reuven is married to Leah, okay? Leah has a sister, Shprinza, married to Shimon. Okay? Two sisters are married. Reuven, unfortunately, commits adultery with his sister-in-law, Shprinza. So she is now usher to her husband, Shimon, because she committed adultery with Reuven. The question is, does the din that she should be usher to the boil take effect? She's usher anyway, it's her brother-in-law. To marry your wife's sister is chorus. So it's already chorus. So maybe the law shouldn't take effect. And therefore what? If Reuven's wife dies, right, is Reuven now free to marry Shprinza? Because you're allowed to marry your wife's sister if, God forbid, the wife dies. He committed adultery with her, but maybe the din of Asher Label couldn't take effect because she was already Asher to him. Just like the Rosh said about the guy. So here the Ramah says, no, it does take effect. It does take effect here. So as soon as Reuven spends the night with Shprinza's sister-in-law, although they carry chorus, on top of that, it's chal, the idea that he's the boil. And the difference is, if in years to come, Reuven's wife, Leah, dies, he won't be able to marry Shprinza because of what happened that night many years before. Different than the case of the guy. By the guy we say it doesn't take effect because it's already osir. What's the difference? Good question. Go find out and you'll tell me. Anyhow, okay, upon him. But the Maharit Alagazi, getting back to the Maharit Alagazi's case, the Maharit Alagazi says that this woman, in his case again, this woman thought she was being Mazana. It turns out her husband had died. Says Maharit Alagazi, since she thought she was committing adultery, in her mind, she's committing adultery, I'm going to give her a knas. She's also to the boil. Even though you don't have the package deal. She's not ushered to her husband. Her husband was dead before the whole thing happened. It's not a package deal. You can have one without the other. You can have one without the other. But why am I bringing Maharit Alagazi? It seems like he's saying that since she thought she was doing the crime, in some level, it's like she did the crime. Like the Briskerov said, Pshat Rambam. If someone thinks they're a Nazir and they act upon that, although they be'emes weren't, the action is somewhat defined by the thought. Okay. We're going to do the rest very fast. Okay. In number 11 is a pasuk in Parshas Vayechi. Yosef was sold by his brothers. Okay? And in the end of Vayechi, Yosef says, Va'atem chashavtem alai ra. You guys had evil intentions. You wanted me to languish somewhere in a dungeon as an eved. But I have news for you. Elikim chashav v'latov. The Eibush had good. The Eibush has spun it around in order that today that I can sustain all of you. It sounds from Yosef that he is telling his brothers, you intended to harm me. Look what happened. Now I'm the king. It's like a case of they wanted to eat basar chazer. It turned out not so bad. Now, he languished in prison for 12 years. So, right, he was a year by Potiphar and then 12 years in jail. 10 of them was 1 year for every brother who he spoke Lashon Hara about, the stories he told his father, and the extra 2 for putting his faith in the Sar HaMashkim. But you'll say those 12 years were really just a stepping stool for his ultimate greatness. He seems to say, you guys had bad intentions, but God spun it around. So it sounds like what the brothers did is categorized halachically as like the woman in this week's parsha. If one wanted to do an Aveira, and it turned out they got lucky. Oh, so join me on the next page, number 12, a fascinating Rabbi Yosef angle. Unbelievable. He wants to know why Rabbi Akiva would cry. Number 12, when Rabbi Akiva would reach the pasuk in this week's parsha, he would cry. And in number 12, the top, he would say, Ma'adach, if someone had in mind to do a sin, but it turned out okay. They need atonement. Imagine if you really messed up. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, look in the Sefer Beis Shmuel Achron, Parshas Pinchas. He brings from the Nezer HaKodesh why Dafka Rabbi Akiva was crying here. And he says the following. You know the Zoyar and the Arizal? The Asara Haruge Malchus. Right? I love the Sugya of Asara Haruge Malchus. And actually, Choshev Rav once challenged me, how do you love this Sugya? Such a sad topic. Yeah. It's true. It's true. But nonetheless, it's just that there are so many dazzling concepts associated with this, and here we'll see one of them. There were 10 Haruge Malchus, right? They were Gilgul, a reincarnation of the 10 Shvatim that sold Yosef. And we've had Shiurim in the past, that only 9 brothers sold Yosef. Reuven wasn't there, like the Medrash Rabbah says, and Binyamin was at home, and Yosef was the victim. That's not what he's talking about here. But there were 10 Tanoim who had to suffer the brunt of the crime of the Shvatim who sold Yosef, right? Yosef told his brothers, Atem chashavtem, you had negative thoughts, the Eibush spun it around. The imkain chet hamechira, what was the sin of, how would you legally categorize and define the sin of the tribes, of the Shvatim? It's like niskavim lebasa chazi, you want to eat treif, point you ate lamb. That's what the brothers did. It came out good. Yosef became the king of Egypt. Now, from all the 10 Haruge Malchus, who suffered the most? Rabbi Akiva. You know why? He was a Gilgul of Shimon. The Kabbalists say he was a Gilgul of Shimon. And that's why like 24,000 Yidden died in the end of Balak from Shevet Shimon. They were following Zimri, who's Shlomiel ben Surishadai from Shimon. They died for failing with the daughters of Midian and Moav. So Rabbi Akiva loses 24,000 students. From all the brothers, who was the most to blame in Yosef's suffering? It was Shimon. How do we know? Rashi writes in Parshas Miketz from the Medrash Rabbah, which brother threw Yosef in the pit? Which one actually threw him in the pit? Shimon was the one who knocked him in the pit. And originally they wanted to kill him. It was Shimon and Levi discussing how should we kill him. Shimon said to Levi, let's kill him. But Shimon threw him in the pit. That's why in Miketz, when Yosef sent them all home, he kept Shimon. He wanted to keep one brother. He kept Shimon. So says Rabbi Yosef Engel, Rabbi Akiva, we know that he was a Gilgal of Shimon. And because Shimon was the most to blame, that's why Rabbi Akiva suffered the worst fate. His Yisurim were much greater than the rest, because Shimon was more involved. That's why when Rabbi Akiva reached this pasuk, he cried. Because what does this pasuk in this parasha tell you? The woman did nothing wrong. The husband annulled the vow. Yeah, but she had evil intentions. She needs atonement. Which meant to him, he's going to have to suffer. As Shimon, he's going to have to suffer for the crime of the Shvatim, which is legally categorized as the same as the woman in this week's parasha. One who intended to do evil and got lucky. That's why Rabbi Akiva cried. Fascinating. So it comes out, we're saying that the crime of the Shvatim was the crime of Niskav and Lechel, Basar, Chaser, and you happen to get lucky. If you look at number 14, it's a Gemara in Chagiga. When Rabbi Elazar would reach the following pasuk, he would cry. He said the brothers could not respond to Yosef when Yosef did the big reveal in Parshas Vayigash. Ki nivalu mipanav, they were astounded, astonished, bewildered from him. So says Rabbi Elazar, if Yosef's rebuke could cause such a silence and dread on their part, imagine the rebuke of the Eibishter. So some Mefarshim want to say, what's Rabbi Elazar's Kal V'chomer? It's the exact same Kal V'chomer Rabbi Akiva made in number 1. Rabbi Akiva said in number 1 that if the woman or anyone who thought they were doing a crime, but it turned out it was okay, nonetheless you need atonement. Imagine if you wanted to do the crime and you did. That's the exact same Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Elazar. Madoch, if the brothers had nothing to say to Yosef, when all they did was have evil intentions. But it turned out okay. Imagine in front of God when God's going to say, you had an evil thought and you carried it out. So it's mamish the exact same Kal V'chomer Akiva made. So fine, everything seemed good. No, not at all. If you look in number 15, there's an Eira Chaim. The Eira Chaim says in Parshas Vayechi, when Yosef said that God spun it around, look what he says. Says Chaim is similar. Yosef tells his brothers, if somebody had in mind to give his friend poison, but instead he gave him a cup of wine, you mixed it up, you gave a cup of wine and said, Einoi mischayev klum, the one that gave the wine has no responsibility. So to the brothers, they wanted to poison him, and instead they made him king. They are potter and they are zakai, innocent, even bedinei shamayim, in the hands of heaven. Says the Chaim, because the brothers' evil intention was not ultimately carried out, although they acted upon it, but it turned out God spun it around, they got lucky, they're innocent even towards heaven. Everyone asks, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone. And if I say that I mean everyone, I mean it. Or else why would I say it if I didn't mean it? But everybody asks, hold on a second. This is against everything we've said in the Shir. Yeah, machshava ra, just an evil thought, it goes with the wind. But if you act upon it, and you happen to get lucky, that's this week's parasha. Niskav and lechel basar chaser, you had lamb, you need an atonement. That was the Me'iriya number 4. This is basics. This is basics to the point that the Maharit Alagazi and the Briskerov says, in a way, it's like you did the crime, in fact. How could the Rechaim say his thing? What's his mashal? If you wanted to poison your friend and you accidentally got lucky, or for his sake, he got lucky and you gave him wine, that's the exact same as wanting to eat chazer and eating lamb. Poison to wine and chazer to lamb, exact same thing. What's the Rechaim talking about? Very perplexing. So I'm going to give you 4 answers, okay? Answer number 1 is based on a Levush in number 16. The Levush in number 16. So the Levush was mentioned, Rabbi Tadal Bam Zayda, Rab Mordechai Yafe. His name was Yafe, which means nice. Kishmoy Kainhu, he was very nice, he was very handsome. And the famous story that there was a noble woman, a wealthy nobleman that tried to seduce him. Many versions of exactly what happened. And he was in a room, he was stuck in the room, and this woman, he was very charming, handsome bocher. And the only way to escape was through the sewer system. And he escaped through the sewer system, and he fell in the sewer system, but he was wearing many garments, I think 10 different garments, and they broke his fall. They also got dirty, so they instead of him, the dirt. But he was so thankful when he got out, he said, Eibishter, I'm going to write for you, Sfarim, all called Levush, Levush this, Levush that, the same amount corresponding to the amount of garments I was wearing while I was saved. But he said, Eibishter, I ask from you that my Eineklich should not have to suffer this Nisayan. None of my grandchildren should have to go through what I went through. And from then on, his family, they were not very handsome, to say the least. And there's a well-known episode that 200 years ago, there was a bocher in yeshiva, one of the big yeshivas in Europe, and his father comes to the yeshiva, and he goes to the Rosh Yeshiva, where's my son, so-and-so? The Rosh Yeshiva looks at him, that's your son, you look nothing alike. The son was a handsome boy, and the father who came did not resemble his son at all. So he looks at the Rav and he says, you're probably wondering why, how he looks so different. He says, I'm generation number 10 from the Levush. The Levush said 10 generations. Now the thing's over, so the looks are back, the good looks are back. Now his name was Mordechai Yafe, was his name. It's interesting, I came across, there was a very great rabbi in Taimon. He's called the Shesile Zeisim, which is his commentary in Shulchan Aruch. He was in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, so the end of the 1600s, 1700s in Taimon. And so he wrote this work on Shulchan Aruch, the Shesile Zeisim, and in his introduction, it's an interesting read, he writes how the Levush became very popular in Taimon. So Taimon's not Stam Sfard, right? These are like Sfard, Sheba Sfard. The Levush, who was Ashkenaz, Sheba Ashkenaz, he's in Prague and Posen and Lublin, and so they. How did that happen? He says Levush's work was so beautiful. So the base Yosef on the Torah is just way too expensive, and then Rabbi Yosef Kai wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is just bottom line, no explanation. But the Levush is perfect. He gives you every halacha with its explanation, with its ration, with the. He's not going to quote you all the Gemaras and the Rishonim, but he's going to give you enough background that you're an educated consumer of the information it's telling you. Everything is milsa b'taima, the halacha with its reason. And the Alter Rebbe followed that exact pattern of the Levush. And he says it was just rampant. Everyone loves the Levush. And he says, I also loved the Levush. He says, I loved it. Until I realized, the Shesile Zeisim says, that the Levush is always following his teacher, the Ramah, who's Ashkenazi. And in Taimon, you got to follow the Yosef Kaira. So he says, like the Levush had us all fooled. Everyone's learning this so great. He says, until I realized that all of the reasons he gives are great, but the actual halachas are the Ramah's halachas, almost all the time. The Levush did have his detractors. There's an episode I've mentioned, the great Pri Chodesh, Reb Chizkiah di Silva, who was a great god in the end of the 1600s in Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim. He dies a young man, the age of 39. And the story is that 3 days before he passed away, he had a dream. And in his dream, he sees a beautiful chair, a cathedra, on top of which was sitting a holy-looking, distinguished-looking individual. And so the Pri Chodesh, Reb Chizkiah, asked someone, who is that man? He said, that's Rabbi Yosef Kaira. And what does he want? He wants to pelt you with lightning for all the times you argued on him. Because the Pri Chodesh was a free thinker. He was like the Marshal and the Shagasar. You don't have to bend to anybody. You learn the Sugya and you paskin. You blaze your own trail, and whoever gets knocked over, that's too bad. But the Pri Chodesh argued often of Yosef Kaira. So the Pri Chodesh said, I'm sorry, he tries to reconcile with the Beis Yosef. It works. The Pri Chodesh's dream continues, looks up, there's someone else sitting on the chair. Who's that? Some other rabbi he would argue with. And these rabbis took turns of sitting there, and the Pri Chodesh had to reconcile with all of them. Until the Levush came. The Pri Chodesh used to nickname the Levush the tailor. Like Levush, clothes, the tailor. And in one particular sugya, the Pri Chodesh said, here the tailor did a poor stitching job. Here the tailor didn't stitch up very well. And the Levush was offended. And the Pri Chodesh asked him for mechila. And the Levush said no. And the Pri Chodesh wakes up in a cold sweat. He was 39 years old. He passed away within 72 hours of that dream. Yeah. So, having said that, in the proper respect for the Levush, in number 16, the Levush is talking about the following. If a Yid's life is in danger, you're not allowed to say you're a goy to save your life. That's what he says. But then he says, even though it's also to say you're a goy to save your life, you're allowed to say something which it can be interpreted that you're a goy. Right? Like the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, when they were in Europe, the Rebbetzin said, we're Orthodox. Instead of saying, Orthodox, you want to take that as Christian, you can. But even then, the Rebbe said, no, we're Jewish. But what the Rebbetzin was doing is this Levush. You're allowed to say something which could be mishtamel, could be interpreted different ways. The goyim think you're saying you're a goy. That's their business. You have in mind that I'm a Yid, and they think you're saying you're a goy. It's fine. You're allowed to do something which is just an issue in thought of how the goyim will understand it to save your life. But then he throws in the clincher. Look at the third to last line. V'chein b'derech zu by forbidden relations. You have a man whose heart, helotino, is lovesick, and is choshek be'eshesish. You have a man whose passion become lovesick, is ill, because he desires a certain married woman. Im tuchal ishtoi lovei elov. If the wife can dress up like that woman and fool her husband into thinking that she is that other woman, to fool him, but often that he should think he's with the erva and he should feel like he's satisfying his crave, his desire, it's mutter. It's mutter for the wife to do this. It's mutter for the wife to do this, all the while the husband thinks he's being mezana. The wife's allowed to do this. It's almost like completely against the Maharit Alagazi that we mentioned, that when the wife thinks she's being mezana, and really she's not, same thing over here, meaning on generally, the husband thinks he's being mezana with a married woman. She knows the truth, and she's allowed to do it l'chatchila. If her husband is extremely lovesick. If they have a child, you'll have the issue of ben atmura, that the child came. Right, so that may happen. But here the husband's portion lovesick, he's ill. Right, the Levush, this simon is in the simon of saving your life by the big three Aveiras. That's the simon that the Levush is talking about. He's talking about a serious situation. And the connection to the din before is just like, you're allowed to fool with the goyim's thought process to save your life. Let them think that I meant that I was a goy. So too, she can fool with her husband's thought process about this forbidden intimacy in order to save his life. It's mamashil. But this is what the Levush says. So comes the base Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkus was a great Rav 150 years ago, and says, you know why this is okay? How is this okay? L'chayra, what the wife is doing is, he's causing the husband to want to eat chazer and happen to get lucky. You can't cause someone to do that. Now, we didn't say so far you can't cause that. It's a Taisus in number 10, which we didn't have time to see. But Taisus in Kedushin says, you're not allowed to cause someone to do something that they think is awesome because you're making them violate this week's parasha of Niskaven Lechel Basa Chazir and Punkt they got lucky. You're not allowed to make someone stumble into thinking they're doing a prohibition. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Paskin. Someone has a restaurant and they know the food's kosher, but they punkt don't have a hechsher. He says, you can't keep it open and have frum people coming into your store. Because the frum person, in their mind, they have no business eating it. There's no hechsher. How do they know they're being served? You as the owner maybe know the truth, that it's kosher. But you can't cause them to do something where they think it's wrong, even though in truth it's okay. So the Beis Yitzchak asks, so what's the Levush saying? What's the wife doing? She is causing her husband to commit adultery in his mind, and he's acting upon it. What's going on? So the Beis Yitzchak says it's because here he has in mind to do an Aveira, but what's he actually doing? He's with his wife. That's a mitzvah. If the end result is a mitzvah, it can justify the means, which is a negative thought. The case of chazer and lamb, you want to eat pig, you happen to have lamb. But here, he's actually doing a mitzvah. So says the Beis Yitzchak, that's by Yosef and the brothers. They wanted to harm him. But in truth, it's not just they did something pariv. They ensured he would become the king of the world, and now he can support the entire family during the years of famine. When the Orach Chaim gives the mashal of poison and wine, he doesn't say poison and water. Why doesn't he say water? Why poison and wine? It has to be beneficial. The idea of the wine is you did him a favor, which in mitzvah and avei would have to be there's a spiritual gain. That's the Beis Yitzchak's take. That's his answer. Now I will tell you one. Oh, gewaldig, thank you. The Beis Yitzchak learns it from the story in Menachos that when the guy saves,
he saves the kid.
Right, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. Maybe that's part of the redeeming factor over there, that since there was a mitzvah, it kind of atones for the negative thought. I would give a bit of a svara, what I think the logic might be is, we said in the beginning, really a machshava ra shouldn't count. But the Meiri says, but if you act on the machshava ra, that solidifies and concretes your negative thought. But if your act was a mitzvah, in no way does that, you can't say that the mitzvah is the concretization of my negative thought, it was a mitzvah. So the mitzvah does not link to your thought. So all you're left with is machshava ra, and Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzvah for l'maisa. I think that's the logic behind it. It makes sense. I'll tell you the issue. In Kedushin, there's a story, number 17. I'll do it outside. Rab Chia Barashi, Mamash almost done. I had a custom that he would always daven, Hashem, save me from my Yetzer Hara. His wife heard this and said, what? He's abstained from me for years. He's past these days of intimacy. What's he afraid of? So she dressed up as a certain prostitute and she enticed him. And he went with it and he fell for it. And he was with her. And when he came home, now she dressed like a prostitute, changed her clothes, her perfume, her jewelry, everything. Her husband didn't know it was her. He thought it was literally a zayna. He comes home later and she was making supper. She had the oven on. Look, 5 lines from the bottom. When he came, Lebese, the wife had turned shragot visu tanur. She turned on the oven. So he went to sit in the oven. She said, what are you doing? He said, I deserve this. I just spent with the zayna. She says, it was me. He said, rubbish. She proved it to him. She said, no, she was able to tell him things. He said, nonetheless, I had in mind for Isser. I had in mind an Isser. And for the rest of his life, he fasted until he died from fasting. Rab Chia Barashi. This was a case of he wanted to eat basar chazer, and he ate lamb. But what do you mean? He did a mitzvah. According to the Beis Yitzchak, he did a mitzvah. He was with his wife. And the fact that it ended up in a mitzvah can cancel out, that was the svar of the Beis Yitzchak, the negative thought. You see, nishtazoi. Nishtazoi. Just because he ended up being with his wife, that does not justify, it's still a case of wanting to eat basar chazer and having tleh. Seemingly. Oh, he said tzaddik, but he took it to extreme and he died. It sounds like a regular person doesn't have to die, but nonetheless there's something wrong. But the Shvatim as well. The Shvatim also tzaddikim. We should say the same thing. That just because it ended off well doesn't exonerate them from the thought. If you look at number 18, Reb Menachem Azariah of Fanu, the Rameh Fanu is here with us. And he says there's a well-known story of Yishai. Right? We've said many times, Yishai abstained from his from his wife, and he wanted to spend the night with his mistress. We've spoken about the story at length in the past. And there was a swap done. He ended up spending the night with his wife, thinking it was the mistress. His wife conceived, Everyone thought the wife had committed adultery with another man because she had separated from Yishai but not divorced. The baby, David HaMelech, was born. He looked different than his brothers, maybe because Yishai's thoughts about the mistress may have affected the looks of the child. Says that Amen Mipanu, Yishai himself comes back as Rabbi Chia Barashi, the story number 17, the Aveira. And Yishai's wife came back as the wife. It's the same story happening again. The difference is, though, that Yishai didn't have any negative thoughts. He was mutter to marry his mistress. He had freed her. And the Rameh, this is from the Rameh in Gilgulei Neshamas. In Asarim Amaretz, he gives a whole cheshbon, he freed her on condition. But she says the Rameh that Yishai had covered all his bases as far as the halachas, the legalities, to be with the mistress. He comes back to Rabbi Chia Barashi, but this time around it's almost like not a rectification. It's worse off, because now he but the question is, you see from here that having a negative thought, even if it ends up, oh, you're with your wife, a wonderful mitzvah, it doesn't, it's not a defense, it's not a justification. So it's a bit of a shaila on the Levush, but definitely on the base Yitzchak, who wants to extrapolate from the Levush to the Shvatim, who are great tzaddikim, to say that even to Hashem they did nothing wrong because the mitzvah at the end justifies the negative means. It seems to be not the case. So that was one answer, and that's the question. Answer number 2 is a number 19 from the Pardes Yosef. The Pardes Yosef gives a simple answer. If you want to eat chazer, means you wanted to do something you knew was wrong. Turns out you ate lamb, good for you. But what if you wanted to do something which you think is right, you think it's a mitzvah? In truth it's wrong, but you think it's right. But you never ended up doing it anyways because at the end of the day you were spared. But in your mind you wanted to do something which in truth is bad, but you thought it was right. Like the Shvatim, who in their mind they felt Yosef deserved to die or be sold, as we've had many shiurim in the past. Yosef was afraid of putting them in danger, etc., etc. The Sfarno. So says the Pardes Yosef a great answer. The Shvatim thought they were doing something which was halachically correct. So in their mind they're doing the right thing. In truth it was wrong. Yosef was innocent. So in truth, right, the action is negative, but the action never happened. So you can't pin them neither for the action nor for the thought. In their mind they thought they were doing the right thing, and in action they never did anything. The issue is only if you thought you were doing something that you know is wrong. That's another answer. Answer number 3 is from the Kli Chemda. Rab Meir Don Plotsky, great Gaon from before the Holocaust. He said it's a difference between a mitzvah between you and God or a man and your friend. The case of the Gemara is very specific. Pig, lamb, between you and Hashem. For the Eibishter, action and thought are really basically the same, right? The Eibishter is boich in the hearts. So you sinned in your heart, the Eibishter, it's held against you. You're challenged by it. Ben Adam lechaveiroi, who knows what's going on in your heart? Here it's all about the deed. Like the Alter Rebbe said, that giving tzedakah, it's about the deed, not the thought. The guy who needs your money, that's it. When it comes to tzedakah, if you give you do the mitzvah without having intention to fulfill the mitzvah, you're still yotzeh. When it comes to other mitzvahs, shofar and sukkah, whenever you do a mitzvah, at least doiraisa, right? So the Alter Rebbe paskin, it's a big machlokes, but mitzvahs require intention. That's between you and God, not between you and your friend. There's the deed that counts. So says the Kli Chemda, Yosef and the brother Adam lachaveroi. There it's all about the deed. The thought is taka nothing. The thought is nothing. Which the only issue is then, what's the Orach Chaim going to do with the 10 Harugi Malchus having to atone for the brother's sin? There's no sin, right? According to these explanations. So I want to suggest the following, which, hear me out. You ready? I need to take a drink before this. When Reuven sins against Shimon, okay, Reuven beats Shimon up, okay? Usually you say 2 things happen. Ben Adam lechaveroi, and also Ben Adam lamakom, the Eibush doesn't want this to happen. I want to posit that there are 3 things that happen. Okay. Number 1 is God says you can't do that. So, but don't even focus on the other guy. You did an action which is against the will of Hashem. Ben Adam Lamakim. Now you hurt your friend. I think two things happened there. Number one, you hurt your friend, but I'm not Aveira. The third thing is that the Eibishter takes offense and wants to defend Ha'alikim Yevakish Es Hanir, the Shlomo Melech says. The Eibishter, right, is pained and hurt about the fact that you hurt your friend. There are two Ben Adam Lamakims. The act itself was a crime to Hashem. But then there's the fact that he takes insult that your friend, who's another child of Hashem, was hurt. There are two Ben Adam Lamakims. When your friend is Meichel you, okay, he could be Meichel his part, and the Ben Adam Lamakim, the second Ben Adam Lamakim, that's God, being his attorney. When your friend is Meichel you believe Shalom, and he releases, so you're released, there's no more issue between you and him, and the Eibush has no problem as far as your friend. But as far as the original Ben Adam Lamakim, you still need to do tshuva to Hashem because you did a sin. You harmed your friend, you violated a mitzvah. So you got to ask Hashem for forgiveness as well. Okay? What I think the Orach Chaim may be saying is like this. Yosef and his brothers. There are three elements over here. The brothers, they sold somebody. Kidnapping, selling. It's a crime in the Torah. Then they hurt their brother. And then the third element is the Eibishter stands by the Nirdif, the victim. The Eibishter stands behind. Now, the Orach Chaim believes Yosef wasn't Meichel his brothers. There's a big debate. We've all said shirim on that. The Orach Chaim and Rabbeinu Bechaya, that Yosef was not Meichel his brothers. But let's just leave that. Over here, he's not even going through Mechila. Yosef told his brothers, I don't have to forgive you because there was no crime. As far as I'm concerned with you, there was no crime. You wanted to poison me, you gave me wine, there's no crime. And he says, you're potter towards heaven as well. What I think he means is the second Ben Adam Lamakim, where the Eibishter stands behind the victim. As far as I'm concerned, no qualms, nothing wrong. So the Eibishter is not going to stand behind and defend my case. I have no case. Between you and Hashem, that's your problem. Yosef has no right to comment about that. That's a case of Chazir and Tleb. And that they're still responsible, and that they had to come back as a 10 Arugim Malchus. Anyhow, it's a theory. Take it or leave it. Looks like you want to leave it. Okay, we'll end with this.